This is Dr. David Pomeroy, your host on ADHD Focus. I wanted to remind you that the show is not intended to be a recommendation for diagnosis or treatment of any condition for any specific person. Please consult your mental health professional or doctor managing your ADHD or mental health issues about any diagnosis or treatment-related information that you hear on the show. Refer your ADHD provider to the show if he or she would like more information. Thank you. Today we're talking about how to save the summer, and that actually maybe save the start of the school year, in terms of how families can set up for success in these now stressful times. My guest is Dr. Sharon Saline, a psychologist of over 30 years experience, whose office is in Western Massachusetts. She has written a book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, which I think is a great perspective for parents and children to start from. And most recently has put out an ADHD Solutions card deck, which both parents and kids can use to help facilitate their communication. Dr. Saline, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always great to talk to you, David. And I am very excited, if that's the right word, to talk about this topic, because I think it's on the tips of all of our tongues and the fronts of our brains about what we're going to be doing, for the rest of the summer for sure, but also how we're going to transition to the fall.
Absolutely. Looking at the things you had set out in terms of planning things for the summer, I think apply specifically or in most ways to the beginning of the school year with distance learning online, where parents may have to do their own work as well as keep children occupied and figure out how to be IT consultant and teacher, depending on how the school has set it up.
And that's so stressful for so many parents, because particularly for parents of kids with ADHD or learning disabilities or high-functioning autism, these parents were not trained to support the learning of kids with these particular academic and social challenges. While, of course, as parents, you know your child better than anyone and you love them, there are still certain skills in terms of educating your kids that probably aren't in your wheelhouse. And so, in addition to the stress of working at home or dealing with job insecurity or housing insecurity or food insecurity, you're now dealing with education insecurity. And it's a lot.
Yes, it is. And I've certainly seen over the past many months, 4 months and counting, in all the patients I talk with, there's an underlying angst for everybody that takes up some of your bandwidth all the time. So that's just an added, that how to deal with uncertainty is difficult. So one of the things that I see on your list of things that help, and it's something I'm trying to stress with patients too, is setting up the daily routine.
Yes. It's really important to have some kind of daily routine. This not only grounds your family in what they're doing each day and what to expect, but it also helps, because you have some kind of predictability, it helps to reduce anxiety. And right now, anxiety is just so high for kids, particularly for kids who have ADHD or other learning challenges and don't know what to expect this fall, and of course for adults themselves. And so having some kind of general routine helps everybody slow down a little bit and know what's coming. And when you have some idea of knowing what's coming, when you can control the things that are within your bandwidth, it helps give you some comfort about the things that you can't control. It instead of feeling like everything is up in the air, there are some things that have some structure.
Mm-hmm. Something that occurs to me, and certainly kids in elementary school, I think would be easier to say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to get up this time at breakfast, and then we're going to start school or whatever you want to call it at a certain time. Whereas with middle school and high schoolers, kind of negotiating how we're going to do this, and no, you can't sleep until 10:30. So yes, you need to be in bed by 11 or whatever.
Well, we want to collaborate with our kids, and particularly with middle and high schoolers. And that doesn't mean you capitulate. It doesn't mean you give in. But they want to go to bed at 2, and you want them to go to bed at 10. Is there somewhere on the other side of midnight, somewhere between 10 and 12, that you could agree on and is a reasonable time, and that you can actually monitor? Because it doesn't work to say to your kids, you need to go to bed by midnight, and then you're fast asleep at 9:30. You can't monitor them. So how are you going to actually create a system that you can monitor and you can agree on?
Yeah, and certainly, and this is true for adults too, having the phone right there or the tablet, whatever, next to the bedside. And I'm suggesting people do screen distance, just as you would social distance from someone else. Mm-hmm. Screen distance needs to be 6 feet away. Once you get to bed, and ideally screen distance starting 2 hours before bed, so there isn't kind of stimulation of things on the screen, and certainly the increased anxiety of anything that's related to news.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that getting off screens anywhere from, and some people say 30 minutes, some people say 90 minutes before bed is helpful. Of course, having adjustments on your screen so that they're not so bright, that there's a filter on them, that can also be helpful. But I happen to agree that we all need time to kind of disconnect from our screens and from the intensity of the world around us so that we can get a good night of rest. And getting a good night of rest also helps reduce stress, which is why it's so important to do right now more than ever.
What have you found to be effective ways as far as limiting that screen time? Even with a third grader, that can be a difficult thing to do.
Well, I think this goes back to setting up some kind of regular schedule, so that it's clear, what is the baseline amount of screen time that you want your child to have, and how can they earn perhaps additional screen time through cooperative behaviors, through easing off a screen period at one time of the day in order to earn something another time of the day. These are ways that you can set up expectations around screen use. When kids are screaming and melting down about getting off their screens, what they're showing you is that they have a dependency, which is concerning, but there's also probably not enough for lack of a better word, regulation about how screens are used in families. What I've seen a lot recently, David, is that over the COVID situation, many parents have given their kids free access to screens, much more access than they would normally give, beyond double, and that kids are now kind of feel entitled and are demanding about it. And when I've worked with families that actually are able to sit down and say, here's what's going to happen. Your baseline is going to be an hour and a half, and it can happen at this period of the day or this period of day. And how you get off of that baseline will determine if you get a half-hour bonus later in the day of your choice, so that way you can have a little more time, or a third, and possibly a second bonus, which is, we as a family will watch something on TV. Either we'll watch something on TV or we'll play a game. But either way, we're going to do something together. Some families link it to chores. You know, you ease off your first period of screen, you get a bonus. You do your chores, you get a second bonus. You don't do your chores, you don't ease off, you don't get the bonus. So for kids, it's a natural incentive because they actually want their screen time. But it has to be, you know, at a set or a scheduled period of time. You know, what I would encourage parents to do is kind of think like a camp counselor right now. You wake up, you have breakfast, you have activity period 1. Then you have a break, then you have activity period 2. Then maybe you have lunch, maybe there's a rest. Maybe there's activity period 3, and then there's free choice, and then chores, and then dinner. And that you can fill in, you know, what you want in those activity periods, and you can link having screen time to the completion of things during that activity period. I think a lot of parents forget that they actually are in charge.
Yeah, I know parents, they have to get work done, so it's easier to let the 7-year-old be on screen while they get something done, and that's the tough balance. Or certainly by age 7, kids know how to find the screen and get on it. So that's that difficulty monitoring, and some of that is probably setting up filters on whatever the screen device is in terms of when it can access the internet, when it can be on, off, those kinds of things. And that takes some planning, and what we've been talking about in terms of setting up routine is have an overall plan to start. And then,
right. And it's good to have a weekly family meeting where you talk about what are your goals? What do you want to have happen? Kids don't want to argue with their parents. They don't like arguing with their parents any more than parents like being argued with. So what I would really encourage families to do is once a week make a time for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, depending how long your kids can tolerate it, and talk about, what do we want? We have a month left of the summer or 6 weeks left of the summer. How do we want to spend that time? What's a few things that we would really like to be able to do? What would be a place we could go that we've never been? Or how could we do local little day trips? Can we go pick some berries? Can we try a new ice cream store? Can we maybe find a swimming hole that we haven't visited? Walk a new path in a park in a city. And that, having things to look forward to like that would really help. And so you want to have some conversation. You can't just impose, this is going to be activity 1 and here's what you're going to do. We want to give kids some directed free choice, right? Here's activity period 1. Here are the 3 things you can choose. Let's brainstorm what those 3 things will be.
Yeah. And that, in terms of the other things that get outside, the ice cream store things, I've been suggesting to people that on a weekend day, and it may be in the afternoon on other days, but do some things out of the usual routine. So it's not, 5 days a week we're doing work and school here at home, and then on weekends we're here at home, and then we're doing work and school at home. But to be able to get out of the house and do some activities, which still can be done with the social distancing and wearing masks, but whether it's a place you can take a picnic and be next to a lake or a river, or have a picnic out in the backyard and set up a tent, or with a blanket fort, something like that. The family can do it, and it's different than just the usual pattern of things.
Yeah, make s'mores in your kitchen. And of course, as your kids get older, it's a little harder to engage them. Teenagers naturally don't want to spend a lot of time with you, but that doesn't mean you still can't have family dinner. I'm working with a family now, and the parents have set their daughter's 17, and they said 2 family dinners a night, and you got to come with a relatively positive attitude. You can't come and sulk and curse at us and be nasty. And that's actually working for this family. The days are set, the times are set, so the teenager can still keep their job and it's either the boyfriend and whatever. And so I think that's what's important, because we want to connect with each other, and we want that connection to be, pleasant and even fun. It can't always be that way. And I do want to say one more thing. Like, for parents, this is a really hard time. It's really hard because you're stressed and you're fed up, and you've got to manage your kids as well, who are having similar feelings to you, except they don't have the maturity or the tools or the skills to manage them. So it's really important for parents that you figure out something you can do for yourself. If not every day, that's small, but at least every week, that fills your bucket. What is that? Is it going for a run? Is it taking a walk with a friend? Is it having a bath? Is it being able to meditate? What is something that helps you fill up your sense of self, of your ability to stay grounded? It's really important right now, because as we head into the fall and we have to deal with school again, no one's excited about this prospect. And so your kids aren't excited, and probably you're not super excited, and we're all worried about contamination and getting sick. And so we have to join as adults and make sure that we have a friend we can talk to every day, or we do our nails, or whatever it is that helps us feel like we are doing something nice for ourselves. It's really important right now.
It doesn't involve your favorite phone game, Angry Birds or whatever the newest one is. That may be fun, but that's more of an escape and not a recharge. Exactly. We want to really focus on what fills me up. And maybe that means during your lunch break, you don't go to the lunchroom, but you actually take a 30-minute walk. And you eat your lunch at your desk. It's not ideal, but it helps you, break up the monotony. Particularly around. And I don't even know why I said the break room, because the break room is probably people's kitchen. Nobody's really working in an office. The middle of the day, if you think, in school, there's certainly lunch, and people are getting up and moving, and so you have the kids at recess in there. And for parents at work, you typically aren't always eating at your desk, but you're going somewhere, or you're intentionally taking a 15-minute walk. And if it's just, okay, you get up from your desk in this room, then you walk over to the kitchen, and, okay, now you've had half an hour time, now it's time to go back and sit in your room, get on the computer. There need to be some transition times, and that's where sitting outside, even if it's just going outside and sitting in the backyard for a while, doing something so you're outside and not just looking at four walls. The other thing I think is important is a transition between home and school, or for parents, home and work. Because normally you have to get on the bus, you get in the car and drive, you do something that helps you mentally get from home and now I'm at work. One patient of mine who's very regimented, and he says, I just need this structure. He usually takes the bus to work. So now he leaves his house, he goes out to his bus stop, he comes back and he does what he would have been doing on the bus. Whatever. At the time he would have gotten to work, then he gets up and goes into his workstation room. So he keeps that routine, but that's that transition. I don't think everybody would be quite that regimented in time, but people who have, they're very happy they don't have an hour commute, but at least maybe it's get in the car and drive around the block 2 times. You're in the car, you're moving, and now you come back and go to work.
Right. I think it's easy to fill up that time with chores and other things, but I would encourage people to go outside. Soon enough it'll be rainy and cold and snowy, and take your child and put them on their scooter and walk around the block. You walk and they can scooter, and then go start your day. You know, that the endorphins that are released through exercise bathe the brain in chemicals that help us feel good. And they'll help you feel good, and they'll help your child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think getting outside, and people up here in Seattle, thankfully we're running into some sunny weather, but, well, you know, it rains, and I say, you know, they make hoods for coats, and they do have hats. And if worse comes to worse, you can get an umbrella, you can go, then you look like a tourist. Because most people in Seattle don't use umbrellas.
Right. Yes.
Get outside.
Yes.
Yes, because the drenching down for it. And if there's snow, you wouldn't. But getting outside, particularly in that morning, get the fresh air, get things moving. So it's not too...
Right, and the other thing is when we're outside, we can wear masks and have contact with people in person. If we're, you know, about 6 to 8 feet apart, you could have a picnic with another family. That's a little harder for kids because you can't necessarily control that they're not going to interact. So maybe you just wear your masks and you just eat on your blanket. And when you're done eating, then they can put their masks on and run around. But that in-person contact is so important, particularly for kids with ADHD who often struggle with social issues, social anxiety, peer relationships. They need to keep using those muscles because online interactions are very different. And a lot of, particularly boys, but also girls, are using gaming as their way to connect with their friends. And you can't take an emotional weather report from what's happening gaming. You can't read into someone's feelings or facial expressions with a text. So and while the mask covers part of our face, it still allows us to have conversations in real human time, and that's very valuable.
Yeah, that's the other thing in terms of masks, whether someone in the family is good at sewing or being able to put things together, or even kids looking through all the various places you can get masks now, find ones that may express yourself. You like bright colors, you want kitties on it, whatever, so that there's some fun with it, because, yes, it is a bit of a nuisance to have to have this thing on your face, but at the same time, you can make it more fun. And the social contact, I talk to so many kids, and it tends to be boys, that they're already into video gaming and they're doing multiplayer and everybody's talking while they're gaming. So for them, oh yeah, see, that's my social contact. Trying to convince them that you need some more person to person. Yes, space time and all those things are helpful, but having some way to relate to people person to person, like you said. Maybe if you have a driveway and people are on either side of the driveway, okay, kids can...
Exactly. I mean, in my town, there was actually an article in the paper, and I saw these teenage girls. They started meeting, in April. They each drove their car to a little parking lot. I would bike by them, and they'd have their cars, apart, and they'd sit on the trunk of their cars, and they'd start to talk to each other. They were social distancing and seeing each other weekly. And there was actually an article in the paper about, the creative ways that kids are trying to connect. And, practicing physical distancing is important. And I think one of the things that's a real concern for parents of kids with ADHD and parents of kids without it is, how do we know that our kids are social distancing safely? And it seems to me that what has to happen is that you need to talk to your kids really concretely and remind them. Show them with a tape measure. This is what 6 feet looks like. When they go out, make sure there's a mask in their backpack. Remind them to use their mask and the value of using a mask, that when they're using a mask, they're protecting not just themselves, but they're also the other person. In fact, really, masks protect other people. And it's hard because if you're with a group of teens and no one's wearing a mask and you put a mask on, it's uncomfortable. But it's really important. And so, you might want to practice with your teen, having them have some friends over in your yard so you can see how your child is managing. Or on your balcony if you live in a city.
Kids or the teens to say, we don't want grandma to get sick. We don't want anybody else's grandma to get sick either. And that's where you're wearing a mask so that you may have a virus in your system and you're spreading it to other people, but you aren't going to get sick for 2 days, so you don't even know you have it. And I think that's one of the things that's difficult for a lot of people to understand. But having that conversation with kids as a family, this is why we're doing this. This is why it's important. And we all want to contribute our own part. Yeah, we can't be making a vaccine or be working in the emergency room, whatever, but everybody can come together to make our own contribution to the effort to control this. And I think when we talked about the weekly family meeting, maybe as coming up to this transition to school, maybe that's got to be twice a week.
Exactly. And keep it shorter. I had one family that they met twice a week for 10 minutes each day, for 10 minutes, Monday and Thursday. Just check in at night, and that worked. The other families like to do a half hour on Sunday, and that's it. Talk about what would make sense. Your kids aren't going to jump up and down and say, yay, family meeting. I know my kids were, it's like, oh my gosh, they would say, I hate being the child of a psychologist. But, they sat down. We would talk about stuff because then I didn't have to nag them during the week. When both of them were applying to college, it was a once a week conversation.
There you go.
Because I couldn't, unless they didn't follow through, in which case I earned myself. I earned, and they gave me a second check-in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's okay. This is an issue we're kind of trying to figure out. Then at our next meeting in 3 days, everybody bring back one idea on how we might approach that, so that there's
I love that idea.
Collaboration and contributing. And there's we don't have to decide it right now, but we're going to set a time that we're going to talk about it again. And that's that. Maybe more frequent meetings. This transition to school is going to be tough. There's one other thing I'd like to suggest, and I've seen so many parents say every teacher is using something different to communicate. It's maybe Microsoft Teams or Google Docs. This one wants you to look on their website. So write to school principals, school administrators, and say, listen, every teacher in your school has to be using the same platform. I don't care what it is. You can teach them how to use it. But none of this.
Here. I completely agree.
You have two kids in different grades, and each of 5 teachers is doing something different. It's totally crazy making. And I don't think that's fair. Now, admittedly, schools were under the gun, and they had 2 weeks after reopen. But hopefully they've thought things through and have one program that everybody's using. Well, as usual with our discussions, we're at a time to close it down. Certainly, I think that overall, one of the main things we talked about is how to reduce the anxiety, because everybody's got some, certainly more than we used to have. What are the ways you can do that in terms of the structure for the day, the weekly family meetings that talk about it, and talking about what are you scared of, what are you anxious about, so that that can be a family discussion, and also parents are modeling this is how we approach problems. So Sharon, thank you so much for your ideas, and hopefully this will help my listeners figure out ways to not only deal with the rest of the summer and get some things in place to be able to start into the school year.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a great pleasure to talk to you, and perhaps we'll check in again in the fall sometime about how families are doing, families that we're talking to in our practices or in our in talks that we're giving, and offer support that is needed at that time. That would be great.
Sounds good. Thanks again. Thank you all for listening. So glad that you could join us. And I'll be back later with another guest and another topic. This has been ADHD Focus. My guest is Dr. Sharon Saline, and her book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, is a great blueprint for being able to help your kids with some of the things that are tough for them.